Welcome to Call Your Hits, a Storm Riders Airsoft podcast. Thanks for joining us, everyone. Today, Pat and I are going to be talking about our upcoming event, Operation Last Refuge 2. We spoke previously about sort of the logistics and the layout of the event, what sort of the overarching concept of the event is. But today, I thought we'd focus a bit more on the lore, the role-playing, the storyline, that part. So in our introduction, we talked about introduction to the previous in the previous episode, we talked about how the village was going to be its own sort of separate thing. And for this event, Pat and I really are dividing responsibilities, mostly because the last time we ran it, I found it was too much to handle both of those things simultaneously. So I'm focused really on the logistics of the event and like the scoring points and making sure the rules are being followed, all that stuff, and then liaising with the actual field owners. And Pat was voluntold to take care of the storyline aspect in the village. So
Pat is making trouble.
There's a lot there. Say again?
Pat is making trouble.
Yeah. And so we thought we'd give some airtime to that because it's the kind of thing that really, even more so than a well-run event, leads to emergent gameplay experiences for participants, opportunities to engage and interact with Airsoft in a way that they likely have. Well, we know in our case specifically, most of them will not have had the opportunity to do. So I thought that's what we talk about today. Before we dive into it, I just want a quick reminder, we do still have Discord community patches available for sale.
Now with
we still have a little bit of stock.
Community.
Yeah. So they're PVC patches. They're Velcro back. They're super nice. They're $15 Canadian, shipped anywhere in the world. Get you some. So help support the channel. Get some of these patches. And we thank every one of you who are listening who've already gotten their patches. If you do get one, make sure you post it in the Discord. All the links to the Discord as well as the patch purchase page is available in the description. So coming back to it, let's talk about Last Refuge 2. So the core component logistically is that we have the village in the center, more or less, of the field, and then two teams vying for control of the field and interaction with the village. So what is, I guess, the first lore aspects? We talked about the two teams, right?
Yeah. So I'm going to sort of take this from a sort of what's step one and work my way from there.
Yeah.
So step one is actually a mechanical element of gameplay more so than it is a narrative one, which is, as with the previous time we ran a Last Refuge operation game, we had a goal of making sure the village isn't in play for the two teams. That means that the villagers have to be not necessarily hostile, but not welcoming, right? So it means there has to be stuff other than the game rules on Phil's end that prevents the two teams from just invading the village and shooting us up. And also that makes it desirable for them to negotiate with us. Right. So to that end, the model we used previously where we had a proportion of the people who were acting as villagers be folks who play Airsoft and who we could sort of toss an Airsoft rifle at and have them do guard detail on the front door and the back door of the village on just two checkpoints, was important, and it's going to be a requirement again, because otherwise I think we'll have just people walking through the village with airsoft guns and shooting at each other in the area. So we started off with the notion, and really this is this is the writer's brief that I got from Phil, was we have two teams. They're going to be a red team and a blue team, and we're going to go with sort of a mega corporations / evil big companies doing stuff kind of narrative. So I pulled out my Shadowrun books and had a look at ideas from there. All right,
great idea.
Let me just grab my pile of RPG books and wargaming books about settings where we're dealing with mega corporations that are shitty and go from there. Cool.
Yeah.
So
I'm sure Galen on the Discord will be all over that.
Right. Hopefully. Yeah. I think he'll at least get a chuckle out of some of what I've got to say then, So one of the big, I guess, key functional pieces there is, so why are from a narrative point of view, are two airsoft teams fighting over this air quotes area, right? Obviously outside of the role playing elements because it's the field we have to play on. Lol.
Mhm.
In game, I've decided that these guys are the two teams are going to represent the tactical divisions of their and or security divisions of their respective evil corporations, who have been sent to acquire something. Right, they have to be here for something. So we talked about having pills as a gameplay objective. Right,
Mhm.
or not so much as a gameplay objective as like a mechanical element. So like, instead of the drink a bottle of water to get medic back in, here's a bottle of like Tic Tacs or whatever. I think
Yeah.
we're going to use Mike and Ike's.
Yeah, that's right.
Um, so um, the intent then on my end is, okay, so how do I play with that? What can I do with that? Because that's the piece of this that stood out as like, oh, that's a cool idea. I can definitely do evil things with mega corporation and drugs.
Mhm.
I read the news or don't. So my thought process there was sort of that maybe these guys are here for either something that's unique to the region or someone who's unique to the region, or both, right? And so the mechanical, taking the field aspect of things is going to represent the here for resources aspect pretty well. Um, and some of the structures on the field are a bit scuzzy. So my writing piece there is like they're here for some sort of fungus that is useful for pharmaceutical purposes. And I'm going to have one of the we have a couple of lab coats that we've used as props for stuff like this before. I literally have them in the back, so they're easily accessible to me. So that seemed like a good, like, oh yeah, got that prop, we can use that again. So someone in the village is going to be a scientist, a doctor, a chemist, whatever way you want to look at that, who is making the painkillers slash combat drugs, whatever we're calling them, that are the mechanics. And I haven't got a bad code name yet, but I'm going to use I want to use like the Mike and Ike like thing in it. So it'll be something terrible. I'll let you know when I sort that out completely.
Yeah, yeah, really.
Um, but so basically, my thought process, and like, there's going to be some flexibility about how some of this works day of, because that's kind of the point.
Mhm.
So the baseline idea, once we have, okay, so evil mega corporations, some sort of pharmaceutical thing, scientist, great. All right, that's easy. Villagers. So my like from there, my key step is, okay, so we're going to step back for a second. We're going to look at, rather than like, we've got the macro story idea fleshed out a little bit. So we're going to look at what is expected of the people who are role playing, right? The people who are selling this.
Mhm.
And that's going to be,
And
oh,
yeah, and before you dive into
yeah.
that, I think it's worth mentioning like this macro storyline level that we're talking about. Like when we've talked to Chaz and Sam and stuff about the events that they've gone to, like Sam said to us very clearly, like he's not there for the lore. Like he doesn't really care about what cost versus a UFS or whatever is like, and that's fine. Like you don't need to understand sort of the lore, excuse me, behind that if you're just going to an airsoft game. And I'm sure that there are players who are going to come to the op, and for them it's not going to care how they're not going to care, but there are players who are going to want to get into the role playing aspect and get that deeper, not immersion certainly, but that deeper sort of like connection to the game. And if you don't do that sort of due diligence to create a little bit of that lore that people can get into, those people who are looking for that, they're not going to find it.
Yeah. And
Right. And so it's not that it's not important to me, and that's I just delegated to Pat. It's just Pat's an old hat at doing this kind of stuff, so it works easier for him. But if we had just said, "Oh well, we're not going to do that," well then you're sort of missing out, or you're leaving stuff on the table for some of the players to get a different experience. And I know for a fact, like when we did the first Last Refuge, there was lore and we had figured it all out and it was slightly different, and that's totally cool, but it's still important. And I've played airsoft games that are like we've done. I remember playing at Flint Ryan, the Battle for Stalingrad, and like there is some there obviously there's lore to the Battle of Stalingrad in terms of the actual history,
It happened.
which has nothing to do with
I'll go
the
pull a
game
book
that
off
we
the
played.
shelf.
Well, yeah, and like when we eventually played the game, like by the time it was the third or fourth iteration of that game, the lore no longer mattered to anybody, and nobody was putting any effort into it, and that was still kind of like, that's not awesome, right? So it's worth putting in that sort of first. If the only thing you do, I guess, is where I'm going with this, is the first step that you just talked about of like, okay, why are we here? Why are we engaging in this environment? Like, what is the overall reason for us to be doing that? Then that should be your first stop, right?
Yeah, so like we can, all of that sort of macro level stuff can be tossed into the player facing briefing. And
Yeah.
I have absolute respect for people going like, yeah, I'm just your player self, man. Like, whatever. I'm not into the narrative. That's completely fine. And the rules are going to make that work fine, and it will be cool. No stress, right? But there are definitely players in our community who will get a kick out of having a more narrative play experience, who will find some immersion in that, who will find it really fun. There are almost certainly a bunch of people who've never experienced anything like it before, so for them it'll be hopefully fun, and I'm sure some of those people will end up on the, I'm really here just to pew pew guys, like that's fine.
Yeah, blasto.
Yeah, exactly, right. But outside of that context, it's still, I want to have it for the people who are interested. So like the next thing for me is, so I get paid to DM, right? Like I do DM for hire stuff, and have for 10 years now.
And for those who don't know what that means, DM, he means dungeon master, so he means running like
so I get paid to run
games,
Dungeons
like
and Dragons and other stuff.
Yeah.
And like it's not a thing I go into much or like work hard to find clients for or anything, but like it's been consistent for 10 years, so it's a thing I'm okay at. Lots of practice. So how's that useful here? Well, that means that I can do a lot of stuff for carrying this story. A big pile of the people who we are expecting to get to sort of volunteer as staff have limited experience or no experience with role-playing games. So the direction has to be keeping that in mind, right? One of the big things that, doing a storyline like this means, or any kind of storyline, but certainly one that of the sort that we're going to end up running, is, we're going to have money in play, right? Not real money, because that would be silly. But like, if you're looking at running something like this, you can buy refills of Monopoly money for like $5. It is literally cheaper than printing and cutting out your own. So we're going to use that almost certainly. We're going to give a certain amount of it to both teams to start out. And that's really, that currency is going to be there not to buy mechanical advantage other than those mechanical advantages that you can buy at the village. So, both teams are going to have, and I guess I'm sort of getting into game mechanics as well as story stuff here, but one of the things I'm going to have to track is, how do the villagers feel about the two teams? And that needs to be done in a measured way, because if we just let it ride with like whatever players wherever at any given time, it'll be very chaotic and it won't feel sensible for the players, right? So, one of the things that's going to happen is, if someone on Team Blue does a good thing for the village, Pat needs to know about it so he can check it off on his little spreadsheet or box or whatever I've got, my my piece of paper in my pocket, whatever works, so that those folks get a benefit from that. So if you walk up to one of the gates to the village and you go, hey, can I get in? The answer initially will be no for both teams, right? What have you done for me lately?
Yeah.
If the player on Blue who walks up to the gate at the beginning, walks up to the gate and says, hey, can I get in? The answer should be no. If the response to no is, well, I got $50, the answer should become yes.
Right.
But in a general sort of sense, the goal for, because this is a really easy sort of improv rule, actually, never say no, always say yes, but, or yes, and, right? So, um, the initial piece is no, because I want them to have to work for it, right? But the work for it part will go out and find them, right? So to use the role playing idea, so you can have story hooks, um, sitting around waiting for players to find, and there are going to be some of those. But we will also have story hooks that are like, wandering around going to get them. So as I plan all of this out, I'm going to have, I have part of it done up, a sort of hour by hour, what are we doing to make people feel like we're here and important and annoying sheet. So
Yeah.
one of those things is there'll be a couple of props scattered around before the game starts, that basically have somewhere on them a tag that says, if found, please return to name of villager. Right. So that is an avenue for people initially to be like, hey, we found your sheep. Here you go. Cool. We like you a little better. Maybe we'll take your guns, but let you wander around the village. Maybe you can come in and use our village as an observation point, but we'll take your guns away. Stuff like that. My current intent is to have sort of a deductive reasoning puzzle for figure out who the scientist is. I'm probably also going to have like if they give you a big bag of money, sure, tell them who the scientist is. But it might not.
Yeah.
But it might not be a bag of money that you can start the game with. Like it might require you to find more money.
Or it could be a lie. They just took your money and scouted.
Well, yeah, exactly, right. And like, who's the scientist? It's Pat. All right, we're kidnapping Pat. All right, we've got Pat back at the objective. Yeah, we've kidnapped him. You're the scientist, right? No. What are you talking about?
Yeah.
Like, I do not do science.
Yeah, and it's those types of opportunities and stuff are really going to leverage people's creativity, right? And again, if you're coming into it being like, I don't want to do anything about that, and all I want to do is Plasto Blasto, well, then your commander is going to have to manage that, because if they send you to the village to go negotiate, or as Chris of the Nomad Airsoft team was educating me on, doing like KLE, a key leader engagement. If they send you to do that, and you're to use a tabletop RPG example, your charisma is like 3, that's not going to go, right? Or if your engagement, I guess, is, if you're not interested in doing that and you're just like, yeah, whatever, man, like that's not going to be good. But there's probably people on your team that are chomping to do that, something like that. And as a commander, you're going to have to figure out, okay, well, who do I want to do? And this is a different dynamic, I would say, than a lot of the like larger games that you have, like if you imagine like an 800 game milsim, like Iron Horse or something, the commander is not going to know everybody. Whereas at our field, it is quite likely that you will know almost everyone who's playing, and consequently, you will know the kinds of players who are your interested LARPers and stuff like that, versus who are your Plasto Blasters, I guess, and you can judge yourself accordingly, right? And that's going to be really important, because again, like if you send someone with no critical thinking, no role-playing skills to the village to go and just find who the scientist is, and they say, oh, it's Pat, and people aren't go like, wait a minute, that doesn't make sense because XYZ that I've heard, and they just kidnap Pat, which good luck, but also fine.
I am very heavy.
Then, but whereas if they were to send somebody else and they go kidnap Pat, and they go, wait, hang on, that doesn't make any sense, because I heard that so-and-so from so-and-so that Pat is not the scientist, because then you're, again, like you have to use those sort of creativity. And I'm really looking forward to seeing how some of those players sort of rise to the occasion or like meet that challenge. Because we had it in a very limited way last time. And I think by virtue of the fact that you're spending more time in deliberately designing this, there's going to be a lot more opportunity for that, I think.
And that's the hope, and, one of the things that I think is going to be cool of this. So, I do plan on integrating it somewhat with Phil's gameplay, right? So,
Oh yeah,
one of the things that's going to be possible is not necessarily from every villager, but like if you figure out the villager who's selling the combat drugs, you can buy them,
yeah.
And they don't require a medic to revive you. So that's a mechanical advantage for figuring that out, doing the role play, and also having some money from your commander to bribe us with. /buy them with, there is going to be, other stuff like that. One of the things that I'm thinking will probably be in there over the course of the day because like not everything will be available all of the time. At lunchtime, dude who has been selling you the combat drugs may be making food. Go away.
Yep.
Right? I am taking a nap. Deal with it. Um, so not everything will be available to people all of the time, regardless of what they do. Figure it out. But one of the things that's likely to be available is hiring a couple of villagers to like go hang out with airsoft guns and do some airsofting in some part of the field for 5 minutes, 10 minutes. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So that can be a useful asset, right? Like buy yourself a Johnny for 10 minutes. Sure. I do think like from a winning the game point of view, I'm also going to throw a little wrench in Phil's plans, I think, in the sense that, so obviously there's the victory points thing that is going to be, yeah, you won the airsoft part of this. But I also kind of want there to be a way for you to win the role-playing part of it.
Definitely. Absolutely.
And so if the narrative is, you're here for the resources and the scientist, get the scientist. Figure out who the scientist is. Take the scientist.
Mm-hmm.
Will there be a, like, game scoreboard, fill side bonus for that? No, we're keeping them separate. We don't want to do that. Will I have a prize for the team that gets the scientist?
Yep.
There
and
you go.
they're very much is a way that you can, and we talked about keeping the scoreboard separate, which I think is fine. But I think there's also, we talked about how there's a win condition, which is control 80% of the field outright. There could be a win condition, which is if you get the scientist alive and you get, their combat stems or their recipe or whatever MacGuffin you're talking about, you get all of, the Triforce of Power, so to speak, then maybe you do win outright. Right? Maybe it doesn't matter because you don't need to control the field anymore because you've come to and you've acquired all the things that you need to acquire, and your Umbrella Corporation or whatever can just leave.
Yeah, exactly. Right? And like there are possible worlds where we incorporate both. Either way, it should be fun, right? And so one of the pieces of that, like I said, of that story element is so like the rule set that I'm giving my actors. With bigger quotes, is my role playing guys is going to be, generally try to say yes, but complicate the lives of the teams. Will I be creating complications to go wander? Yeah. There will absolutely be hours in the day where I'm just like, all right, guys, go stand around in the middle of that firefight until someone talks to you, like until someone comes over and asks you what you're doing.
Is there a world in your planning, and I'm just curious about this because as you're talking, I'm like, okay, so the scientist obviously is going to be a big freaking deal.
Yep.
And if everyone on the villagers know who the scientist is, that's a lot of potential points of failure.
Oh, totally. Why would I tell everyone?
But I was just thinking, actually, my question was going to be like, is there a world where you actually don't even tell the individual who is the scientist that they are the scientist?
I could do that. What I'm kind of leaning towards, and this will sort of depend a bit on our volunteers, because like once we know the final staff, it will be easier for me to completely sort this out. But what I'm kind of thinking about is sort of doing the like one night Ultimate Werewolf kind of experience where like, there's a scientist. The scientist knows they're the scientist. That's not the only role they have. They are trying to pretend they're not the scientist really hard. And where the villagers may have clues, so if I've got 6 players, then, we'll say for argument's sake, I have six role players, and number 5 is the scientist. 5 knows he's the scientist. 6 knows 2 isn't the scientist. 2 knows 4 isn't the scientist, and so on.
Yeah.
And if the people role-playing want to try to figure it out during the game, great. That's fun, right? Like that gives them something to do that'll be a laugh. And we're going to have like 10 people, so it will be significantly harder than with 6. Especially because to do the werewolf thing, we'll add a couple of complicating roles. So 2 isn't the scientist. 2 is the drug dealer. 2 wants the scientist to stay not caught. 2 will lie about who the scientist is. Up to and including going, I'm the scientist. But also, if this means that if the teams approach the village and are like, get players into the village and, make nice with us so they can wander around and chat with people, they can look at a player and go, so, like, hey, do you know who the scientist is? I'll give you $5 to tell me who the scientist is.
Mm-hmm.
But they won't necessarily get the right information or the right answer. But if they work to puzzle it out, they'll be able to probably narrow it down to one or two people. If they've also done other stuff, they can maybe narrow it down to one. Does this mean maybe they will have to kidnap two people? Yep.
It's funny. I was just thinking as well, like, is there a world? And I know, like, we're basically like brainstorming some ideas now, which I'm fine with.
Hey,
By the way,
everything can be made better.
I was thinking about how, like, maybe we get the teams, we only give them one opportunity to kidnap someone. So, like, whoever you kidnap, that has to be like, that's your lock in.
Well, I mean,
right?
Inherently, there's also the fact that, so one of the factors that has to be answered is, so how do we keep these teams honest in terms of they're dealing with the village?
Right.
So there are going to be roughly half as many people in the village in a defensible position as there are people on either team, in all likelihood. Mm-hmm. They're all going to have airsoft guns. If you come into the village and take someone, whatever your rep with the village was, is now set to permanently kill on sight.
Yeah.
Right? If you can come in and borrow someone and people don't notice, right? You smuggle a pistol in or pay someone to let you bring a pistol in, and you walk up to me and put a pistol to my back and I'm like, all right, we're leaving and you're not going to make any noise. Okay, cool. Well, like, eventually someone's going to notice Pat's gone.
Yeah.
And yeah, you will not be coming back into the village. So, like, you probably do only get one chance, really. Unless your response is to assault the village and just take everybody, or take the village and then figure it out the hard way. But one of the shit things for either team in terms of doing that is the scientist can be shot exactly once.
Yeah.
So if you shoot the role-playing objective, he dies, and no one wins.
As a side note, I think we talked about this last time, but one of the concepts that's really important that came from LARP is this idea of, like, using specific colors to designate stuff that's out of the game. So, like, when they say, like, oh, let's say they kidnap Pat or whatever, and I mean, for argument's sake, Pat may or may not be the scientist, but let's just say for this example, Pat is not the scientist. So, I mean, it doesn't really matter if he is or not for this example, regardless. Anyway, the point is, when they kidnap Pat will be quote unquote kidnapped, but he still needs to be in the game. So what's he going to do? Well, he's going to put on, like, the jacket or the color or whatever that designates him as out of the game. That way people know, well, Pat's still present because he still has to run the show, even though you've been kidnapped. So on paper, then we're reporting, okay, this person, this villager, the character of, Jon Snow that Pat is playing, is now kidnapped and no longer in the game. Right. And then Pat may go and do a costume change.
Pat will go and be another character for the rest of the day.
Exactly. And it's going to be the challenge, of course, that can be sometimes confusing for the players because they know who we are. So people know who Pat is. So it's like, oh, Pat is wearing a flannel jacket. Oh, now Pat's wearing an army jacket. Is he a different character? There's a little bit of suspension of disbelief there that's required, but it is feasible. Like, that's what we did last time. And
it should work fine. I mean, the functionality is, like, also, really, unfortunately, we have a finite amount of staff and a finite budget. So that's how that's going to have to work.
Quite right.
But I mean, we're all capable of suspension of disbelief. We're playing soldier with toy guns.
Airsoft.
Like, let's be real here. So I don't think that's, I don't think that'll be a huge issue for people to deal with. At least my hope is that it won't be. But yeah, so in essence, we're going to have sort of a, mystery theater experience for people to come into the village and try to figure out. And, people can come into the village and spy on the other team, come to the village and, smuggle in guns and do stuff. Or
try to.
Well, yeah, but they need to act with an awareness of the fact that, we are keeping track of how you treat the villagers. And if you're shitty to them, or if you do stuff that, violates the rules that they've set, and those rules will be pretty sensible, don't come into our village and shoot up the place, then, there will be benefits or consequences for doing that in a smart way. In a general sort of sense, the goal is anytime the teams do something clever, I would like them to get something out of it.
Yeah.
Um, Also, though, because this is an airsoft game and I don't want people to not go play airsoft as well, I'm going to try to set it up so like there's a, every hour or so there's something they can do, something useful, something that benefits them, and gets them rep with us. So like it's possible that some players will spend a significant amount of time in the village trying to figure out who the scientist is. But the team's probably going to end up, both teams are probably going to end up having opportunities to interact with the village meaningfully every hour for something, for more in-game currency, for more combat drugs, for, like I said, a couple of guys to go be on their team for 20 minutes, just
Yeah.
to keep it something that's interesting and appealing, even to the players who are here to win a game of airsoft and play a game of airsoft predominantly, so that they're not going, well, that's just there and I don't care, right? If you're not interested in participating, that's completely fine, but it will still be to the benefit of your team for your team to be doing it well.
Yeah. One thing I'm curious about, we touched about this on this earlier, like the volunteers that we're going to get, like firstly, the Storm Riders are not playing this event. We're running it. So we will be
Yeah,
the
we are the
villagers,
volunteers.
Farmer Fong, like we did last time and all this kind of stuff. But we will likely get other volunteers as well, because who are not as roster, just to flush the numbers a little
Totally.
bit. But I guess my question for you is, so you mentioned that many of them, some of them are not adept to they're not adept to role-playing games. Like they might not be familiar, and they're certainly not actors, right? As far as I'm aware, anyway.
Yeah.
Nobody on the Storm Riders is
Relatively
an actor
unlikely
by trade. So how are you going to deal with that? Like just from like a volunteer management perspective, like what are some of the key things that or concepts you talked about, the yes and or the yes but like what are you going to encourage those players to do?
So, thing one is we're going to have probably a meeting before we do that. I mean, not probably. We are going to have a meeting before the game, and I don't mean game day, to sort of talk about, okay, so like who's comfortable with what, right? So if we get a person who is here to help us out, who's shy, which is not impossible, right? Like we do know people who aren't super into talking to other people, right?
Mm-hmm.
I can still make use of that human, right? And we can figure out ways to do this that they don't find stressful. That's a thing that could come up. We'll see. I have a couple ideas of how to handle it if it does, ranging from you're not a speaking part to maybe we put you in situations where you don't have to talk to large groups of people, whatever's comfortable for folks. In terms of the okay, so like how do we get these people who don't necessarily know how to role play to role play? So like I said, I'm going to give everyone a little piece of paper that says you are number 7, you are not the scientist, you are the scientist, whatever. So I'm going to steal a trick from actually the current edition of Dungeons and Dragons, to be completely honest with you, which is here's a cheat sheet for your character. Right. Mm-hmm. So I'm not necessarily going to assign people characters. Like if someone wants to go, yeah, this is the character I'd like to play. Great. Awesome. You're doing my work for me. I love it.
Mm-hmm.
But, so, for argument's sake, Chris goes, all right, so I'm going to be here. I'm going to be doing this. What do you want me to be? It's like, all right, well, maybe we have a couple of costume changes for each person so they can be more than one villager. So maybe this villager is, steal the Smurf, steal the Care Bears, right? This is Grumpy, right? Yeah. This dude is cranky. Act cranky. Don't be antagonistic. Don't be like pushing people and being like, but yeah, I don't want to talk to you. I'm surly. Go away. Right?
Yeah.
And okay, so that's one character trait. In order for this to be like fun and believable, we probably need 2. Okay, so you're cranky and you're avaricious. You're greedy. So you're cranky, but as soon as someone flashes money, you are all help, all smiles. Cool.
Yeah.
Right? We might get another person who's like, all right, so you're helpful. And you're an idiot. Like just, you are helpful, but you cannot tie your shoes without supervision.
Pat made that roll for me. No role playing required.
So, that person will absolutely tell them everything they know. But also, if you ask them, which side of the village are we on, they will tell you left if they are on the right side of the village. Not out of contrariness, but because, sorry, I got confused.
Yeah.
Right? And so it's easy to just sort of do up a bunch of those. I mean, frankly, you can put two lists of character traits down and roll a dice if you need to, right? Like just randomly assign
I can
them.
only imagine being like, I thought you said Pat was a scientist. No, I think I misheard. I think he has
Yeah,
psoriasis.
exactly, right? Like just,
Okay.
you know,
Yeah.
yeah, we're looking for the scientist. Oh, that's Pat. Hey, Pat, are you the scientist? No, no, I'm not. Right. You know, and you know, all right. So, like again, if you want like fun prompt, lies all the time. Who's the scientist? That guy.
Yeah.
Right. Who are you, Jeb?
It's a good way to keep it very simple and straightforward for people who never don't have a lot of experience, because then you're not telling them like, oh, you got to lie about this, you got to lie about that, or this is your storyline or your background or whatever. It's just act this way
Yeah,
or act that
exactly.
way.
And like we want to minimize ultimately the complication for people, because it's a lot easier to remember your bit if your bit is a couple of ideas, right?
Mhm.
You know, and like you don't need to be an actor to do this, right? Um, you know, like again, just possible character traits. All right, you're hungry. What? You're hungry. Most of the time, if people ask how you are, you're hungry. Whether you, the person, are hungry or not, if the team brings you food, come tell me. And like they get bonus rep with the village because the hungry guy is happy.
Yeah. And like think about that, right? Like imagine you are in the village or whatever and you're complaining playfully, in character, sorry, is a better way of saying it, about being hungry. Like, man, I'm starving or whatever. And then someone's like, man, we should bring that guy some food. Like that is some level of attention to detail,
Right.
right? By those players who are like, oh, well, actually I have food. Here you go, right?
Yeah, exactly. And you know, it's one of those things where it's okay, sure, you know. Some of it will be like I said, I'm gonna have some props scattered around. So like one of the villagers at some point in the day will be like, man, I lost my large inflatable wheel of cheese. Anyone seen that? You know, and like one of the teams will probably have found a large inflatable wheel of cheese. Cool, here we go, right?
Yeah.
And that both gives them an avenue to interact with that player and also an avenue to get rep with the villagers and have that be good for their team. And also,
Definitely.
and like this is
Definitely.
one of the goals, it shouldn't be too serious, right? You know, like if we were running a super serious, really LARP heavy milsim game, I wouldn't be as goofy as I'm going to be, right?
Mhm.
You know, but like if I, you know, give Karoo a stuffed lamb and go tell him to go be my lost shepherd so that I can tell the teams that I'm interacting with that someone needs to find, you know, Jimbo, our lost shepherd, because he's gotten lost in the
Yeah.
field again. And they wander around until they find Karoo and he's holding a stuffed lamb. It'll be like, oh, okay, I know what he is. Lol.
Yeah.
And
Yes.
and that kind of experience is positive, right? Like, you know, the goal of a good role-playing game is to give people a fun time and an immersive time, and also to give them stories to talk about later, right?
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
some of those stories will, by necessity, be dumb stuff. Some of them will be serious, hopefully.
It's crazy actually how much overlap there is between role playing in general and airsoft in general. If you take out the role playing aspects, it's like we're playing airsoft to create those kind of stories that we want to share later. To it's like, oh my god, can you believe this happened? Or like I had this amazing play or whatever. And in most cases, especially like in my experience and your experience, I know for sure, it's never really been about who won and who lost. It's been about, okay, well, what kind of experiences did we have? Like I remember we did Operation Agamemnon, or no, not Agamemnon. Operation, what was the one that you did?
Asgardian
Asgardian
Chill is the
Chill.
one.
Yeah, and like I remember it's like myself and Mark and Fong and Cal, and like I don't remember who won that game.
But you,
I don't know if it was
but I
us.
bet
I
you
don't know
remember
if
wandering around in the woods in the fog for a couple of hours, being like, "What's going on?"
definitely. Yeah, I absolutely remember that. I remember moving as a unit with the team and like feeling like such a badass. I remember feeling like super top tier, like just really like at my absolute peak. I don't remember if we won or lost that game. I honestly I can't
Neither
tell
do
you.
I.
I really can't.
Which is
But
bad
yeah,
because I
so
was the
I,
game
I think
organizer. But whatever.
and there was very little role playing. associated with that. Like there was a little bit some story missions and stuff, and we're looking for some sort of like intel virus. I
Mm,
can't even
yep.
remember, but there was a little bit of that. But really, the parts that stuck for me was the gameplay and like how we felt, and so that's what we're looking to create again in this up. And I think the role playing is just going to add that extra level
Yeah, totally.
because
It's
some
value
people
added.
might not care about the gameplay. Yeah, exactly, right. And I was talking to Johnny last week on the podcast, and he's saying, it's not that Frontline is getting stale, but like we go to Frontline, we know exactly what we're getting. And so for some people, they're going to look for something different. And this is going to be that different thing. Maybe not for everyone, but for
Yeah, well,
a selection of
it's
them.
going to be a different experience. And like at a minimum, right? Even the players who were here who don't really care about the role playing stuff, you know, will get a laugh out of just weird hijinks that are going on over there. What bizarre thing is going on over there? Which is ideal, right? Ultimately,
Yeah.
that is pretty good to me. So for the people who, like I said, who want to take it seriously, who want to play murder mystery theater and figure out who my scientist is, rad. For the people who want to interact with people in a sort of role playing fashion and like, get to know the characters and stuff, awesome. For the people who are just there to play airsoft and aren't really going to interact with the villagers other than when I send them out to do weird stuff on the field, at least you will get to see the storm riders doing weird stuff on an airsoft field and go, the hell?
Yeah.
what you know
Yeah. And I mean, all of this will ultimately, quite likely, culminate in some sort of huge engagement, right?
Definitely.
Where the villagers and one team try and defend the village from a huge attacking force or something like that, right? Who knows? So there will be a little bit of everything for everyone, I
Yeah,
think.
I mean, that is the plan.
Yeah.
So yeah, hopefully that all sounds appealing to local folks. And, I mean, hopefully it sounds cool to the folks who aren't local and gives you some ideas for stuff you could try in your own games. And if you have suggestions for me for evil things that I can do to the people playing, then man, send me a DM. I
Absolutely.
will
And
I
I
will
think
take terrible ideas and good ones.
yeah. Oh my God. We it's not that we don't have enough of terrible of ideas of
We
our
just
own,
like
but
them.
if you have, yeah, exactly. If you got some, we would love to hear them. I think ultimately, if you're listening to this and you're like, man, I would like to run, a game that's similar to this or my own game in my community, especially if you're in a place where you don't have access. If you're not living in the States and you can't just get on a commuter flight and go to a larger event, especially in those of you who play in smaller communities, this kind of thing is possible. You absolutely can set up this type of event in your areas with a little bit of work, working with your local fields, working with your communities. And if, like us, you're mindful of the type of community that you have and you're presenting and you're trying to stand up the kind of game that is appealing for people in the community and is accessible to people in the community, you absolutely can have a successful event. And so hopefully some of the concepts and ideas that we're sharing will help you you'll be able to apply some of them to get some of that benefit and create these types of events in your areas.
Absolutely. And once we've run the op, frankly, I think we can create a little like sub channel in the Discord and just pitch Phil's rules document and my role playing document up there. And just, if people want to look at them, great. If they want to critique the silly things that I've scribbled in the margins, awesome. If you want to take it and try to run it yourself, great. You know,
Yeah, and we
like,
absolutely will be taking like video during the event and photos. I know that amongst his other duty, Jason Fong will be out there with his camera, with his drone for sure. I'm going to be out there, of course. We're going to have multiple GoPros, multiple cameras, to really capture the as much of the action, as much as the fun stuff as possible. Because if thinking back and looking at footage from Last Refuge as I've been editing sort of the briefing videos for the group, I mean, what a great experience! How much fun did we
yeah,
have?
no,
Like we still talk about some of the stuff that
we
happened. We've done it multiple
we
times.
spent, and this is one of the really cool parts for us, right? So we put this together, we spent our time, we spent our money, we spent our effort on this, and you know, we're quite a while later and we still talk about it as just a blast, right? Like just a really
Yeah,
fun, zany in some ways, but like just goofy fun thing we did that we had a laugh doing, and that we honestly, like, when Phil pitched this and was like, oh hey guys, do you want to run something like that again? I think it says a lot that, like, what, 12 years later, everyone's like, hell yes, absolutely,
yeah.
right? There was not a single, like, nah, Like there were people who were like, yeah, I haven't played Airsoft in 4 years, but I'm still in the team chat because we're still friends and we're still teammates, like whatever, you know. And they were like,
Yeah.
heck, yeah, absolutely, I will be there, right? Like,
Yeah.
you know,
Exactly
which is
right.
like awesome, right? That tells you how much fun people had doing this, you know, and you know the fact that we're going to go for a beer after probably doesn't hurt,
Yeah.
right?
And I
But
mean,
like,
at time of yeah, yeah, totally. And at time of recording, I mean, it's like you know, a month away basically, before we kick this off, and I'm just so excited. And working with Mike Keats at Frontline has been awesome. He's been super super helpful in getting information out there. If you happen to be listening to this episode and you are local, firstly, well, you now have a lot of insight that a lot of people aren't going to necessarily have. So there you go. But they are taking pre-registration for the event on this Frontline page. You can select which team you'd like to be on if you're going to be playing with other players.
blue
There's
team
a
best.
Facebook event. Yeah, blue team best. If there's a Facebook group. There are video briefings that I've created for the event. And we're gonna have more details about the actual logistics of like Chrono the night before and stuff. That's going to be coming out in the future, and it's early bird pricing as well. So I think it like $10 off your registration or something if you book now. So a bunch of stuff for if you happen to be local listening to this. Go make sure that you're registered because it's going to also help us make sure that we have enough people set aside for interactions. Like if we happen to get like 60 players.
Yeah, we're going to need to find a few extra
Well,
hands, you know, which is very
yeah,
doable.
exactly,
It's just good for
exactly,
us to know that, you know, so we're not like
totally,
phoning people up the day before and being like, hey, man, what are you doing tomorrow?
exactly. But guys, thanks so much for listening. Really appreciate it. Hopefully you got something out of this. But that's all we've got for you this week, and we will talk to you next
Thanks,
week.
guys. Have a great week, and hopefully you found that cool.